On December 10, 1978, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. At the U.S. presidential retreat known as Camp David, 3 months earlier, U.S. President Jimmy Carter, Sadat, and Begin had signed a peace treaty between Egypt and the Israeli regime. The Nobel Committee said at the time that it was awarding the prize to the two for that treaty. But while Egypt continues to be one of the few Arab countries to have formal relations with the Israeli regime to this day, peace itself, as defined by Arab populations, remains impossible with Tel Aviv. In this episode of In a Nutshell, we are taking a look back at the historical reasons why. Sadat sought to retake control of the Sinai Peninsula, which Egypt had lost to Israel during the Six-Day War of 1967, by making peace with Israel. He did retake that control, but by recognizing Israel as a state. Besides offering concessions in the treaty itself, he put himself at odds with the wider and much bigger Arab populations. One such group was the Palestinians themselves, whose historical land Israel had been occupying since 1948. Sadat had made no attempt to address Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, as well as Syria's Golan Heights and Jordan's West Bank, which had also been occupied by the Israeli regime. Arab governments reacted by expelling Egypt from the Arab League, and anger on the Arab streets raged towards Israel and Sadat, not least on the streets of Egypt itself. The country was convulsed in the months after the signing of the treaty by an uprising against the current order. And the Egyptian president was ultimately assassinated during a parade in Cairo on October 6, 1981. Years later, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, which had opposed Sadat's so-called peace treaty with Israel, tried its own hand at compromise. Just as Carter had years earlier mediated between Sadat and Begin, US President Bill Clinton watched as PLO leader and president of the Palestinian Authority Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin shook hands and signed what became known as the Oslo Accords. The agreements, secretly negotiated in Norway, led to the recognition of Israel by the PLO and of the PLO by Israel as the representatives of the Palestinian people. Needless to say that Arab peoples continued to view the Israeli regime as an occupier, and that the PLO was no representative of all Palestinians. The accords never led to real peace, as the Israeli regime continued its acts of aggression against Palestinians and other Arab countries. The Israeli regime attacked the Gaza Strip multiple times and even occupied the territory before Hamas, another Palestinian group, forced the Israeli military out. The Tel Aviv regime continued to build settlements on occupied territories in an attempt to make the establishment of any Palestinian state impossible. That only naturally made peace with the regime impossible. Arafat himself, despite his numerous concessions to and compromise with the Israelis, continued to be the subject of continued and committed Israeli assassination attempts, as he was considered a symbol of the fight against Zionism. He suddenly fell ill on October 25th and died days later. While much controversy arose over the cause of his death, subsequent studies found him to have died of poisoning by polonium. Arab leaders have in the past attempted to make peace with Israel, but the regime has proven to be hell-bent on occupying and keeping land that doesn't belong to it. As such an entity, the Tel Aviv regime will forever be an impossible partner to peace, and Arab populations, regardless of what their governments do, seem to know this.